Good evening. How's everybody doing? It's great to be learning with you on a Wednesday. Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. Okay. Nina, help me out here. I mislabeled the class today. First of all, it should be a key DAF, as I mentioned yesterday. And we're going to try to do a double DAF. So it should be page 1883 and 1884, pages 74 and 75. So we can do a little bit of catching up. So let's just relabel that. Okay, today's episode of AT Daily. I'm verklempt. Let me welcome people. Who's in the house? Yehuda in South Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bill in Missouri, Shandor in the Bronx, Paul in the Great Northwest, Renee in Indiana, Lorraine in Texas, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Nancy in North Carolina, Lucy in Minnesota, Tom in PA, Gail in Kansas City, Guy in Ohio, Chaim in Florida, Aoife in Florida, Spencer in Connecticut, Ella in Southern California, Guy in Ohio. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our dear friend Wes Bilson in memory of his dear deceased wife, Judith Wolfe Bilson. She was a dedicated Jew, a skilled physiotherapist, and a woman of adventure who will never be forgotten. Amen. We knew Judith. She will never be forgotten. It's an honor to dedicate today's class to her memory. Wes, may her neshama have a great aliyah in the world of souls, and may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings and the merit of enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And we say amen. Okay. Big day. This is a very, very famous teaching that we find here in Tractate Sanhedrin on page 74a. Our DAFs today are 74 and 75. God willing. We got a good head start on it yesterday. So we're about halfway down 74a and continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 9 here in chapter 8 of Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. Whoops. Where am I? Okay, here we go. Now, the Gemara will now consider which prohibitions are permitted in times of mortal danger. Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yechotzadak, the sages who discussed this issue counted the votes of those assembled and concluded in the upper story of the house of Nitza in the city of Lod. Right, so this is a famous vote taken by the sages, and there were many votes taken by the sages over what the halacha would be, but this one they wanted it recorded for posterity. This is where we took the vote, right? In the upper story of the home of Nitza in Lod. With regard to all other transgressions in the Torah, if a person is told, transgress this prohibition and you will not be killed, he may transgress that prohibition and not be killed, right? So for example, somebody says, eat this ham sandwich or I'm going to shoot you. You can eat the ham sandwich. That is true with respect to all the prohibitions in the Torah, with 3 exceptions that we're going to cover now. And even with respect to the ham sandwich, there are circumstances where you wouldn't eat the ham sandwich, as we shall see. But generally speaking, if somebody says, transgress this prohibition that's in the Torah, or I'm going to kill you, you can transgress it, and we'll explain why as well. So, again, with regard to all other transgressions in the Torah, if a person is told, transgress this prohibition, or I will kill you, or the way it's worded here, and you will not be killed, he may transgress that prohibition and not be killed. Why? Because the preserving of his own life overrides all of the Torah's prohibitions. That's why, for example, we don't turn lights on and off on Shabbos. But to save someone's life, we turn the light on and off, we drive in the car, we start a fire, we cook food, whatever we need to do to save a life. Overrides all the prohibitions of Shabbos, including saving your own life. This is the law concerning all prohibitions except for those of idol worship, avodah zarah, forbidden sexual relations, arayos, and bloodshed, damim. Okay, so you're not allowed to engage in idolatry, to bow to an idol in order to save your own life. You're not allowed, if he says, I'm going to shoot you unless you rape that woman, you're not allowed to rape that woman. You should accept to be killed. Or if he says to you, I'm going to shoot you unless you shoot that guy, right? I will murder you unless you murder him. You're not allowed to murder him. You have to accept to be killed in that situation. Those are the 3 laws that we do not violate, even on pain of death. Now the Gemara asks, is this true? And should one not transgress the prohibition of idol worship to save his life? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa? Rabbi Yishmael said, from where is it derived that if a person is told, worship idols and you will not be killed, from where is it derived that he should worship the idol and not be killed? The verse states, you shall keep my statutes and my judgments, which a person shall do, and he shall live by them. That's Leviticus 18:5, which teaches that the commandments, the mitzvahs, were given to provide life. They were not given so that one will die due to their observance. That's why, for example, we will definitely desecrate Shabbos in order to save a life. So this would seem to indicate, okay, well, we get you can't rape or murder to save your own life, but why not bow to an idol, right? So it sounds like you should be able to do that. That's not the law, but Rabbi Yishmael is making this argument. Now the Baraisa continues, one might have thought that it is permitted to worship the idol in this circumstance, even in public, which means what? What's public? In the presence of many people. Therefore the verse states, neither shall you profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. Meaning that the Jewish people are obligated to sanctify the name of the Lord. Kiddush Hashem. Leviticus 22:32. So evidently, one is not required to allow himself to be killed so as not to transgress the prohibition of idol worship when in private, but in public, he must allow himself to be killed rather than transgress. Right? So now it seems like Rabbi Yishmael is saying, well, maybe if it's in public, if they say bow to this idol in a public place, then you have to allow yourself to be killed. But if the guy says to you, bow to this idol in private, maybe then it's allowed. It's not, but you might have thought that. The Gemara answers, those who voted on this law in the house of Nitza stated their opinion in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. As it is taught in the Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer says, it is stated, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Deuteronomy 6:5. Sounds familiar? That's the first paragraph of the Shema, the basic prayer we're obligated to say in the morning and in the night, every day. After you declare, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, and then you mutter, blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever. Then we say, ve'ahavta, and you shall love the Lord your God. And you shall love the Lord your God. That's a commandment. And you shall love the Lord your God. And how shall you love the Lord? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. Ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta es Hashem Elohecha. You shall love the Lord your God. Bechol levavcha. With all your heart. Uvechol nafshecha. With your soul. Or with all your soul. Uvechol meodecha. And with all your, and this is normally translated as with all your might, or with all your resources, but it's an interesting word, meodecha. Your meod. What's meod? Well, when we say that something is tov, we say it's good. When we say something is tov meod, we're saying it's very good. So meod basically means very. So what does it mean that you will love the Lord your God with all your veryness? Right? That's why they translate it as might or resources, and it's normally understood to mean, your possessions. But literally, it's more interesting than that. It's much more interesting than that. What does it mean, your veryness? Right? Your veryness. What is that? Your very. I'm Sal. So it means I should be very Sal, right? In other words, whatever I have that makes me Sal, that's what I need to love God with that, right? Whatever you are, that's essentially you, the most of you, that's what you have to love God with. That's what God wants from us, right? And that's a blessing. Loving God in that way elevates your life, gives it so much meaning. It's amazing. I've talked about this many times. We're commanded to love God. If you love your wife, you say, I love you, honey, all the time. No one has to command you to say to your kids, I love you. It just comes naturally. When you say these words to God, I love you, God, you will start to feel what this command is all about. At any rate, said Rabbi Eliezer, it is stated, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your veryness. If it is stated with all your soul, why is it also stated with all your veryness? Which indicates, it is normally understood by the sages as with all your possessions, okay, including what you really possess inside. But okay, let's just go with the standard definition, with all your possessions, right? So if it says with all your soul, why do you need with all your possessions? Isn't with all your soul, that's your life, right? With all your soul means even if it costs you your life, according to Rabbi Akiva. So if it is stated with all your soul, why does it also say with all your might? Which indicates with all your possessions. And if it is stated with all your might, why is it also stated with all your soul? It seems like one of these would be superfluous. So rather, this teaches that if you have a person whose body is more precious to him than his property, so it is therefore stated with all your soul. That person must be willing to sacrifice even his life to fulfill the commandment of sanctifying God's name, right? As it said, you shall sanctify the Lord your God, right? That's a commandment on the Jews. Where did I just read that a moment ago, right? Neither shall you profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. I will be hallowed among you means we will hallow God. We will sanctify God's name among us, right? We will consecrate. We will elevate God's name. If we publicly bow to an idol, that's desecrating God's name. So that would be violating that commandment, even on pain of your life. So for a person who considers his life to be worth more than his possessions, okay, he has to be willing to give up his life to sanctify God's name and not bow to an idol in this public place or even in private if somebody commands you to do that. Now, that's somebody who values his body. You would hope most people would value their lives more than their possessions. Right? So if you have a person whose body is more precious to him than his property, it is therefore stated with all your soul. That person must be willing to sacrifice even his life to sanctify God's name. And if you have a person whose property is more precious to him than his body, who's that? That's the famous joke. Somebody will remind me who the comedian was. It was one of the biggest laughs in television history in front of a, I think, studio audience or a theater audience. He's a comedian, and he's saying, a guy came up to me and said, your money or your life? I repeat, your money or your life? Hold on a second, I'm thinking. So if you have a person whose property is more precious to him than his body, well, for him, this law is stated with all your might, right? So then, okay, fine. If that's what's going to get to you, then you have to be willing to sacrifice all your property in order to sanctify God's name. That person must be prepared to sacrifice all of his property for the love of God. According to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, one must allow himself to be killed rather than worship an idol. Right? The first one, with all your soul, means you should be willing to give up your life rather than worship an idol. And that's how we know that idolatry, you're not permitted to perform idolatry in order to save your life. You're obligated to accept death rather than commit the sin of idolatry. From where is it derived that one must allow himself to be killed rather than transgress the prohibition of forbidden sexual relations and the prohibition of bloodshed, meaning murder? This is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rebbe says, with regard to the rape of a betrothed young woman, it is written, Deuteronomy 22:26, but you shall do nothing to the young woman. The young woman has committed no sin worthy of death. For as when a man rises against his neighbor and slays him, so too with this matter. Just like the victim of murder is not to blame in any way, neither is the victim of rape. But why would the verse mention murder in this context? But what do we learn from a murderer? Now, the mention of murder came in order to teach a law about the betrothed young woman, and it turns out that in addition it teaches a law from that case. The Torah juxtaposes the case of a murderer to the case of a betrothed young woman to indicate that just as in the case of a betrothed young woman, one may save her at the cost of the rapist's life. We learned that yesterday. You can kill a rapist to stop the rape, to save her. So too, in the case of a murderer, one may save the potential victim at the cost of the murderer's life, just as we learned yesterday. And conversely, the Torah juxtaposes a betrothed young woman to a murderer to indicate that just as with regard to a potential murderer, the law is that if one was ordered to murder another, he must be killed and not transgress the prohibition of bloodshed. So too, with regard to a betrothed young woman, if she is faced with rape, she must be killed and not transgress the prohibition of forbidden sexual relations. Now, what that said right there is that the woman should say, well, you can kill me, but I'm not going to let you rape me. That is not the law. That's just what's being argued right here. That's not where the law ends up. What is the law is that a man has to say, I will not commit rape. Even if you hold a gun to my head and you say you'll kill me unless I rape, I will not rape. You can kill me. But a woman, when she is raped, that is a passive act. She is not to blame for that. And she, can allow herself to be raped rather than murdered. If she can save her life by allowing herself to be raped, she should do that. She certainly is permitted to do that. But a man who is threatened with a gun to his head, you commit that rape or I will kill you, he may not commit that rape. He must accept to be killed. The Gemara asks, from where do we derive this law with regard to a murderer himself, that one must allow himself to be killed rather than commit murder? And the Gemara answers, it is based on logical reasoning, that one life is not preferable to another, and therefore there is no need for a verse to teach this law. And the Gemara relates an incident to demonstrate this. As when a certain person came before Rabbah and said to him, the Lord of my place, meaning the local official, right? Presumably either a Persian or a Roman official, said to me, go kill so-and-so, and if not, I will kill you. What shall I do? And Rabbah said to him, it is preferable that he should kill you and that you should not kill. Who is to say that your blood is redder than his, that your life is worth more than the one he wants you to kill. Perhaps that man's blood is redder. This logical reasoning is the basis for the law that one might not save his own life by killing another person who is innocent, right? Can you kill another person to save your own life when that person is the one coming to kill you? 100%, and you should. So of course you can save your life by killing another if that other person is coming to kill you. But to save your life by just killing some innocent person, no, that's not permitted. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, the sages taught that one is permitted to transgress prohibitions in the face of mortal danger only when it is not a time of religious persecution. But in a time of religious persecution, when the non-Jewish authorities are trying to force Jews to violate their religion, that's the situation of the ham sandwich I alluded to earlier. Then, even if they issued a decree about a minor mitzvah, one must be killed and not transgress. Right? So if, for example, when the Greeks or the communists, right, or the Nazis, or just various people over in the course of history have tried to eradicate Judaism. Sometimes they just try to kill all the Jews. But the Greeks didn't try to do that. They tried to eradicate Judaism and said it is prohibited for you to practice this religion. When they do that, then you don't listen to them, even on pain of death, even to when they, to do, if they tell you to eat the ham sandwich, then you don't eat the ham sandwich, even if they kill you, because you're in a holy war at that point, trying to sanctify God's name by keeping Judaism alive. Is everybody going to be courageous enough to do that? Probably not, but that's the law. Now, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, even when it is not a time of religious persecution, the sages said that one is permitted to transgress a prohibition in the face of mortal danger only when he was ordered to do so in private. But if he was ordered to commit a transgression in public, then even if they threaten him with death, if he does not transgress a minor mitzvah, he must be killed and not transgress that law. And the Gemara asks, what is a minor mitzvah for this purpose? And Rav Bar Yitzchak says that Rav says, page 74b now, even to change the strap of a sandal, right? So there was a Jewish custom with regard to sandal straps. If the Gentile authorities were to decree that Jews must change this practice and wear sandal straps like those worn by the Gentiles, one would be obligated to give up his life rather than veer from the accepted custom. Likewise, right, wearing a kippah, that's not a commandment in the Torah. Nowhere does it say you shall keep your head covered. That has become a custom, for thousands of years with the force of law, but it's not actually a Torah commandment. So, if it was this situation where they're forcing you to take off your kippah publicly or they're going to kill you, according to this, you would be obligated to say, no, I'm going to keep it on. Now the Gemara asks, and the presence of how many people is required so that it should be deemed a public act? And Rabbi Yaakov says that Rabbi Yochanan says an action is not considered a public act if it is performed in the presence of fewer than 10 people. So the Gemara clarifies this. It is obvious that we require that these 10 people be Jews, as it is written in the verse from which we derive the requirement of 10 for the sanctification of God's name, quote, and I shall be sanctified among the children of Israel, Leviticus 22:32. And Rabbi Yirmiyah says, or asks, what is the law if there were 9 Jews and 1 Gentile present? So the Gemara answers, come in here and answer from that which Rav Yanai, the brother of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, teaches in a Baraisa. This is derived by means of a verbal analogy between the word among, written with regard to the sanctification of God's name, and the word among, written with regard to Korach and his assembly. We saw this yesterday. Here, with regard to the sanctification of God's name, it is written, and I shall be sanctified among the children of Israel. And there, with regard to Korach, it is written, separate yourselves from among this congregation. So the meaning of the word congregation, written with regard to Korach, is derived by means of a verbal analogy to the word congregation, written with regard to the spies sent out by Moses to scout out the land. And there were 10 that participated in the sin of freaking the people out and saying, yeah, the land's beautiful, but we'll never be able to conquer it. The people all panicked. And that's when God got furious and said, after all I've done for you, brought you out of Egypt with a strong hand and outstretched arm, now you think I can't lead you into the promised land that I have given you? Fine. You people will perish in the desert. You'll wander around for 40 years, and your children will enter the land. That was all caused by the 10 spies. The 10 spies were referred to as an Ada, as a congregation. There were 10 of them. That's how we derive that a congregation is 10. And then we extend that to the situation of the congregation of Korach. And that's where we learn from this day to this day that, when can you sanctify God's name? Like during a prayer service and say, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem HaMevorach, right? We bless God's name in public. To do that, you need a minyan. You need 10 people. And that's how we derive that. So just as there, the congregation of spies numbered 10 and all were Jews, so too here, concerning the sanctification of God, there must be 10. For this to be considered public, there must be 10 of them there, and they must all be Jews. So the Gemara raised a difficulty. But wasn't the incident involving Esther? With Purim coming up, right? Tomorrow's the fast of Esther, and Friday is Purim. Okay, here we're talking about the Purim story of Esther. Did Esther desecrate God's name? Well, she was ordered into the palace, right? Brought into the palace, gathered up with all the other beautiful young women of the land of Persia. And basically, she was forced to cohabit with King Ahashverus. That's not permitted for a Jewish woman, and that was very public. So should she have accepted to be killed rather than submit to that, is the question. But wasn't the incident involving Esther, i.e. her cohabitation with Ahashverus, a public sin? Why then did Esther not surrender her life rather than engage in intercourse with him? And the Gemara answers, Abaye says, Esther was merely like natural ground. What does that mean? She was a passive participant. The obligation to surrender one's life rather than engage in forbidden sexual intercourse applies only to men who transgress the prohibition in an active manner. A woman who is passive and merely submits to this prohibited sexual sex, right, this rape, is not required to give up her life so that she not sin. And that's why before, the woman does not have to give up her life rather than be raped, but a man has to give up his life rather than commit rape. Rava says that there is another justification for Esther's behavior. When Gentiles order the transgression of a prohibition, not in order to persecute the Jews or to make them abandon their religion, but rather for their own personal pleasure, this is different. In such a situation, there is no obligation to sacrifice one's life, even when the sin is committed in public. And Rava explains, as if you do not say so, then how do we give them coal shovels? This is a practice, right, in the Babylonian Jewish community, which was part of the Persian Empire. And what would happen? The Persian priests would take coal shovels from every house, fill them with coals, and use them to heat their temples on their festival days. Although this involved assisting idol worship in public, Jews would not sacrifice their lives in order to not do so. Rather, the reason that they cooperated is certainly that a measure enacted for the Gentiles' personal pleasure is different. They were just keeping warm. Here too, concerning Esther, Ahashverus engaged in intercourse with her for his own personal pleasure. He wasn't saying the Jews can no longer be Jewish, or I will show, this Jewish God of yours, that somehow I'm, not submitting, I will not, that I'm above him somehow. Right? He wasn't acting like Pharaoh. Ahashverus just wanted the most beautiful woman in the land to be his wife. Why did he want that? Because he was a, lusting hedonist. That's one thing we know about Ahashverus. So it wasn't to make a statement about Jews and Judaism that he took Esther. So when he did that and she passively allowed him to do that, there was no desecration of God's name. Now the Gemara comments, and Rava follows his own line of reasoning. As Rava says, if a Gentile said to a certain Jew, cut grass on Shabbos and throw it before the cattle, and if you do not do this, I will kill you, so he should cut the grass and not be killed. But if the Gentile said to him, cut the grass and throw it in the river, then the Jew should be killed and not cut the grass. What is the difference? Because it is clear that the Gentile is not seeking his own personal pleasure, but rather he wants to force the Jew to violate his religion. Right? So if the Gentile says to the Jew, do this forbidden labor on Shabbos so that I can benefit from it, okay, so then you do it rather than be killed. Otherwise, you don't do it. But rather than be killed, you can do it. But if he's telling you, do this forbidden labor so that I can prove to you that your religion is nonsense and I want you to, I want to pull you away from your religion, then you say no, even if he's going to kill you. The sages raised a dilemma before Rabbi Ami. Is a descendant of Noah, right? B'nai Noah, right? You mean the Gentiles of the world, the descendants of Noah, who is commanded to refrain from idol worship. All people are commanded not to perform idolatry, not just Jews. So if a non-Jew is ordered to bow before an idol, is he obligated, or on pain of death, is he obligated to accept death rather than bow to the idol like a Jew would be obligated? That's a question before Rabbi Ami, right? Is a descendant, is a B'nai Noach, right? Is a Ben Noach, is a descendant of Noah who is commanded to refrain from idol worship, also commanded about the sanctification of God's name, or is he not commanded about the sanctification of God's name? Right? You sanctify God's name when you accept death rather than bow to an idol. So is a non-Jew obligated the same way? Abaye says, come in here and answer to this question from a Baraisa in which it was taught. The descendants of Noah were commanded to observe 7 commandments, right? The Sheva mitzvahs b'nai Noach, the 7 commandments, the 7 Noahide commandments. What are they? To establish courts of law, to refrain from cursing God, not to commit idol worship, idolatry, not to commit adultery, not to murder, not to rob, and not to eat a limb from a living animal. And if it is so that they are commanded to sanctify God's name, then there would be 8 commandments. Rava said to him, that's no proof. As when the Baraisa speaks of 7 commandments, the 7 Noahide commandments, it means the 7 commandments themselves with all their associated obligations. So according to Rava, the mitzvah to sanctify God's name, can be understood as a detail of the prohibition of idolatry. Now, before we go on, because non-Jews are not commanded to sanctify God's name the way Jews are, but before we go on, remember this. Non-Jews, right? They have the 7 Noahide commandments. Again, establish courts of law, do not curse God's name, do not commit idolatry, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not rob, steal, and do not eat a limb from a living animal. Those are the 7 quite specific commandments. But those 7 commandments come along with all of their associated obligations. And from that, you see that they are categories of commandments that require much further study to understand. And there's all kinds of other stuff that's associated with that, right? How do you know if you're cursing God? How do you know what is idolatry? How do you know who God is? That requires Torah study, right? And so according to this, you could see that, at least everything that's associated with the Noahide commandments in the Torah is an obligation on non-Jews to learn it. And that is a wide net indeed when we're talking about knowing who God is, so that you not curse him or bow down to other, entities that are not God. Okay, now we're on page 75a. I'm sorry, no, still at the bottom of 74b. So the Gemara asks, well, what halakhic conclusion was reached about this matter? And Rav Ada about are non-Jews obligated to sanctify God's name? In other words, to accept death rather than commit idolatry. Rav Ada bar Ahava says that they say in the school of Rav, it is written that Naaman, the commander of the army of the king of Aram, said to the prophet Elisha, for this matter may the Lord pardon your servant, that when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to bow down there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow myself down in the house of Rimmon to help him, that is, he was forced to bow down before an idol out of fear of his master, the king of Aram, who's a non-Jew, talking to the prophet Elisha, saying, I now believe in your God, because you healed me, right? He was healed from his saras. I see that your God is the only God, but I'm going to have to go back to my master, the king of Aram, who is an idolater, and there are times when, just so he won't kill me, I'm going to have to bow, to the same idol alongside of him. And it is written in the following verse, and Elisha said to him, go in peace, indicating that the prophet Elisha did not criticize him for acting in this manner. Now 75a. And if it is so that a descendant of Noah is commanded about the sanctification of God's name, Elisha should not have said to him, go in peace. But the Gemara answers, this situation where Elisha permitted Naaman's conduct happened in private. When Naaman bowed down in the house of Rimmon, he did not do so in the presence of 10 Jews. Whereas that question that was raised is whether or not a descendant of Noah must sanctify God's name in public, which is to say, in the presence of 10 Jews. Consequently, the question remains without a solution here. Where does the halakha come out? This is from Rambam. If a descendant of Noah, right, so this is a Gentile, a non-Jew. If a non-Jew is forced to violate one of his commandments, even if he is forced to worship idols, he is permitted to transgress. He doesn't have to accept death instead of violating one of the Noahide commandments. As descendants of Noah are not commanded to sanctify God's name. According to the Rambam, to Maimonides, this is the conclusion of the Gemara, although Tosafos appeared to be of the opinion that the Gemara does not decide the matter. So Rambam says non-Jews are not obligated to accept death rather than commit idolatry. But other opinions say, not clear. So, in the face of a law that is unclear, you probably don't have to accept death. But if somebody wanted to be stringent upon himself, seems like he certainly would be permitted to accept death rather than bow to an idol, even if he's a non-Jew. I'm not a poskening rabbi, so I'm just reading and reporting what I'm seeing here. If you have a question on this, talk to your local Orthodox rabbi. Okay, page 75a. Apropos the discussion of the obligation to allow oneself to be killed rather than engage in forbidden sexual relations, the Gemara notes that Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, there was an incident involving a certain man who set his eyes upon a certain woman, and passion rose in his heart to the point that he became deathly ill. You've heard of somebody becoming lovesick? This guy became lovesick to the point that he was on the brink of death. So they came and they asked doctors what was to be done with him. And the doctors said, he will have no cure until she engages in sexual intercourse with him. The sages said, well, then let him die. And she may not engage in sexual intercourse with him. The doctors said, okay, well then she should at least stand naked before him. The sages said, let him die, and she may not stand naked before him. The doctors suggested, okay, well the woman should at least converse with him from behind a fence in a secluded area, so that he should derive a small amount of pleasure from the encounter. And the sages insisted, let him die, and she may not converse with him behind a fence. Seems like an early explanation of the guy who's so needy. Yeah, that's not the guy for you, ladies. But this guy who literally, physically was on death's door unless he could have some woman? No, he doesn't get the woman. Too bad. He should die. She is not permitted to him. She, maybe she's a married woman, maybe she's a single woman, but she doesn't want him. She doesn't want to marry him. If she was married to him, this wouldn't be an issue. Then he could have her. Obviously, he was not married to her, and he may not have her just to cure his sickness. And the Gemara comments that Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi and Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani disagree about this issue. One of them says the woman in question was a married woman, and the other one says she was unmarried. So the Gemara tries to clarify the issue. Granted, according to the one who says that she was a married woman, the matter is properly understood, since the case involved a severely prohibited forbidden relationship, i.e. adultery. The sages did not allow any activity hinting at intimacy between this man and her. But according to the one who says that she was unmarried, what is the reason for all this opposition? Why did the sages say that the man must be allowed to die rather than have the woman do what was requested? And Rav Papa says this is due to the potential family flaw, i.e. harm to the family name, as it is not permitted to bring disgrace to the entire family in order to save this lovesick man. And Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, says this is so that the daughters of Israel should not be promiscuous with regard to forbidden sexual relations. Were they to listen to the doctor's recommendations, Jewish women might lose moral restraint. Right? If it got around that this guy, all he had to do was say, "Oh, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die unless I have this woman," and then he could have her, maybe a lot more guys would start telling this story. So the answer is no. And the Gemara asks, but if the woman was unmarried, let the man marry her. And the Gemara answers, his mind. So he's like, let him marry her. Like, obviously, that if he could marry her, there wouldn't be a problem. Why couldn't he marry her? Either she was prohibited to him for some reason, right? Maybe he's not a Jew. Maybe he's a Jew, but he's a priest and she's a divorcee. Or maybe she just doesn't want to. So the Gemara answers, his mind would not have been eased even by marriage. What? You mean like even if it was permitted for him to marry her and then he did marry her, he would still have this problem? Why? And this is in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yitzchak. As Rabbi Yitzchak says, since the day the temple was destroyed, sexual pleasure was taken away from those who engage in permitted intercourse and given to transgressors. As it is stated, stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Therefore, the man could have been cured only by engaging in illicit sexual interaction. In other words, this degree of lust that was making him sick, part of it, right? It wasn't just that she's beautiful and he's attracted to her. It's the very fact that she's prohibited to him, right? And since the temple was destroyed, it's like the spiritual level of the people dropped to this whole other level, right? Where sadly, there's people who lust so much, and it's that lust that takes them away from Torah, away from mitzvahs, away from what is good and right, and people just following their lust. I mean, they get themselves into terrible situations, whereas what's permitted, okay, like you don't have that same kind of crazy lust because it is permitted. Interesting that when before the temple was destroyed, people could have that kind of crazy lust, even within what was permitted, right? Within their marriage. Hint, clue, hint. If you develop a really wonderful relationship, it's wonderful. Just say that. Okay. That's the end of chapter 8. And let us move on immediately to chapter 9. Still on page 75a. Chapter 8 was all about one type of death penalty offense. Now chapter 9, another type of death penalty offense. Right there we were talking about stoning, sins that are punished by stoning. Now we're going to talk, right? Or was it decapitation? I think there was chapter 7 was stoning, then decapitation. Now we're going to talk about transgressions that are punishable by the death penalty of burning. Right? And burning, as we've learned, does not mean burning at the stake. That's not a Torah penalty. Burning as a death penalty under Torah law, it's not good. It's a death penalty. but it means that they pour molten lead down your throat. But before we get to like how it's carried out, we're going to talk about who does this apply to. Okay, 75a, chapter 9, Mishnah number 1. And these are the transgressors who are burned in the implementation of the court-imposed death penalty. Who qualifies for this? One who engaged in intercourse with a woman and her daughter, right? I think the Torah calls that a depraved plot, or here it's translated as lewdness. I think depraved plot kind of captures the spirit of it better. One who would have intercourse with a woman and her daughter, yeah, it's a depraved plot. And one who is the daughter of a priest, and one who committed adultery. I'm sorry. Adultery is not burning. The daughter of a priest who commits adultery, she qualifies for burning. Okay. Included in the category of the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with a woman and her daughter, and the resulting execution by burning, there are a bunch of other similar relationships. If a man engaged in intercourse with his daughter, which is incest, but the punishment is not burning, but if he's had sex with his daughter and the daughter of his daughter, right? If a man had sex with his daughter and his granddaughter, then he would qualify for burning rather than what is for incest is charis, actually. But if it's the man doing the raping, I think then it's stoning, whatever. But if he sleeps with both his daughter and his granddaughter, then the death penalty is burning. Also, if his daughter and the daughter of his son. Likewise, the following are also included in this category. Intercourse with the daughter of his wife, even though she is not his daughter, and the daughter of her daughter, and the daughter of her son, as well as intercourse with his mother-in-law and the mother of his mother-in-law, and the mother of his father-in-law. The prohibition and punishment apply both in cases where a man marries a woman and then engages in intercourse with her daughter, and in cases where a man marries a woman and then engages in intercourse with her mother. Depraved plot. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Tana of this Mishnah, right, the anonymous sage who states this Mishnah, does not teach the case of one who engaged in intercourse with a woman whose daughter he previously married. Rather, the Tana teaches the case of one who engaged in intercourse with a woman and her daughter. So by inference, one may conclude that both the woman and her daughter are mentioned in the Mishnah for the purpose of establishing that there is a prohibition of intercourse with either of them, and when he engages in intercourse with the first of them, he is already liable to be executed. Now, if a man marries a woman, he can have intercourse with her. Why would he be prohibited from having intercourse with her at the outset? He hasn't slept with her daughter also. So why is the woman initially prohibited to him? Because there's a different prohibition, like she's his daughter, right? There's the incest prohibition. Then if he sleeps with his daughter and his granddaughter, then we add a woman and her daughter, and we move from whatever the previous death penalty was over to burning. So that's why they're saying we need women who are prohibited in the first place as an extension of this law. And the Tana teaches additional women are included in the category of the prohibition of and punishment for engaging in intercourse with a woman and her daughter. So by inference, one may conclude that with regard to both his mother-in-law and the mother of his mother-in-law, the prohibition and punishment are written explicitly in the Torah. The Torah says you cannot sleep with your mother-in-law. And with regard to those additional women enumerated in the Mishnah, the prohibition and punishment are derived by means of interpretation. So the Gemara comments, this works out well according to Abaye, who says that with regard to the dispute between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva that is cited later in the Gemara on page 76, we're on 75 now, so later we'll come to this in 76b. So the difference between their opinions is only concerning the interpretation of the meaning of the verse, but there is no practical difference between their opinions. According to Abaye, whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah, it is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And Abaye explains that Rabbi Akiva maintains that the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with the mother of one's mother-in-law is stated explicitly in the Torah. But according to Rava, who says that the difference between their opinions is with regard to the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with one's mother-in-law after the death of his wife, whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah. Again, we're going to get into the weeds here, but just keep in mind, the basic law is you can't sleep with a woman and her daughter, or you can't sleep with a woman and her mother, right? 2 generations of women, a woman and her mother, either way. But then other laws are going to be implied because of the way that the Torah is worded, and that's why they're going to go for all these other relationships. We're not going to get tightly into this diagram, but basically this diagram is to help you understand who else is included in this prohibition. Your mother-in-law and her mother, your daughter-in-law and her daughter. All of these kinds of relationships are going to qualify for this mother and her daughter that this man would sleep with. All of it is prohibited, but the question is which death penalty will apply if you've got 2 generations of women, even if it's not directly a woman and her daughter, but maybe it's a woman and her daughter-in-law. That's also going to qualify under this, but they're going to need to derive that from the verses, and that's why we're going into what Abaye and Rava and Akiva are saying here. But according to Rava, who says that the difference between their opinions is with regard to the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with one's mother-in-law after the death of his wife, whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah, right? So you can't sleep with a woman and her daughter even after one of them dies, right? They remain prohibited to you. The opinion of the Tana of the Mishnah corresponds neither to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva nor to the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, as they both maintain that the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with the mother of one's mother-in-law is not stated explicitly in the Torah, rather it is derived. So the Gemara answers, Rava could say to you, amend the Mishnah and teach one who engaged in intercourse with a woman whose daughter he previously married. And the Mishnah teaches, included in the category of the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with a woman and her daughter and the resulting execution by burning, there are his mother-in-law and the mother of his mother-in-law and the mother of his father-in-law. And the Gemara comments, Abaye holds that everyone agrees that the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with one's mother-in-law is stated explicitly in the Torah. And the Tana enumerates his mother-in-law together with the relatives concerning whom the prohibition is derived by means of interpretation. Therefore, according to Abaye, since the Tana seeks to teach that the mother of his father-in-law is included in the prohibition, he teaches the law of his mother-in-law and the mother of his mother-in-law as well, despite the fact that the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with one's mother-in-law is stated explicitly in the Torah. By contrast, Rava holds that the woman and her daughter mentioned in the first clause of the Mishnah are his wife and his mother-in-law. Therefore, according to Rava, since the Tana seeks to teach that the mother of his mother-in-law, that the mother of his father-in-law and the mother of his mother-in-law are included in the prohibition, he teaches the law of his mother-in-law in the latter clause as well, despite the fact that it is stated explicitly in the Torah. See how careful they're being on something that is just kind of obvious, but it's not obvious if you're going to be careful to sow. Where do we know? How do we know that including the prohibition of a man, having sex with a woman and her daughter includes a woman and his mother-in-law or his mother-in-law and her mother? The Mishnah enumerates several women with whom intercourse is forbidden who are included in the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with a woman and her daughter, which is punished by execution by burning. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? They are derived, as the sages taught, and if a man takes a woman and her mother, it is a depraved plot. They shall be burned with fire, both him and them, and there shall be no lewdness among you. There shall be no depraved plot among you. I have derived only that this punishment applies to one who engages in intercourse with a woman and with her mother. From where is it derived that one who engages in intercourse with the daughter of the woman married to him, or with the daughter of her daughter, or with the daughter of her son, is also executed by burning, right? We derive that it's prohibited, and we derive that the punishment is burning. The Baraisa continues, lewdness is stated here with regard to the punishment, there shall be no lewdness among you, and lewdness is stated there with regard to the prohibition. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter. You shall not take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are near kinswoman, kinswomen, it is lewdness. It is derived by means of a verbal analogy that just as there the prohibition applies to the woman's daughter and the daughter of her daughter and the daughter of her son, so too here the punishment of burning applies to one who engages in intercourse with the woman's daughter and to the daughter of her daughter and to the daughter of her son. And the Baraisa continues, from where is it derived to render the status of males like that of females with regard to this punishment? That's what we're talking about, the daughter-in-law or the mother-in-law, right? That you're going to have to go through another layer, right? Even the daughter of your son, right? Your granddaughter via your son. It seems like this should all be connected only through women, but we're going to render the status of that man, in the in-between generation to be like a woman. How do we know that? Lewdness is stated here and lewdness is stated there. Just as there the Torah renders the status of males like that of female relatives, so too here the Torah renders the status of males like that of females. From where is it derived to render the status of relatives below like the status of relatives above? Lewdness is stated here and lewdness is stated there. Just as there the Torah renders the status of relatives below, your descendants, like the status of relatives above, your ancestors. So too here the Torah renders the status of relatives below like that of relatives above. And just as here the Torah renders the status of relatives above like that of relatives below, so too there the Torah renders the status of relatives above like that of relatives below. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara will proceed to elaborate on the derivations cited in the Baraisa. The master says, from where is it derived to render the status of males like that of females? And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the status of males like that of females? If we say that it means that one who engages in intercourse with the daughter of the son of his wife is executed by burning like one who engages in intercourse with the daughter of her daughter, so the status of the daughter of her son and the daughter of her daughter are derived together in the first clause of the Baraisa, as both are written explicitly in that prohibition. So rather, this clause in the Baraisa means that one who engages in intercourse with the mother of his father-in-law is executed by burning like one who engages in intercourse with the mother of his mother-in-law. And the Gemara asks, now we have not yet established the law of one who engages in intercourse with the mother of his mother-in-law. And the Baraisa is seeking to derive the law of one who engages in intercourse with the mother of his father-in-law from the law of the mother of his mother-in-law. But we haven't established that. How can we base a law on something we haven't not yet established? And at the top of 75b, Abaye says, this is what the Baraisa is saying. From where is it derived to render a relative who comes from his family, for example, the daughter of his daughter and the daughter of his son, like a relative who comes from her family, for example, the daughter of his wife and the daughter of his wife's daughter? How do we know? Because lewdness is stated here and lewdness is stated there. Just as there the Torah renders the status of male relatives like that of female relatives, so too here the Torah renders the status of males like that of females. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it so? With regard to a relative from his family, the term lewdness is not written. As the verse states, the nakedness of your son's daughter or of your daughter's daughter, their nakedness you shall not expose, for theirs is your own nakedness. It doesn't say lewdness. So Rava says, Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi said to me, the equation of his relative to her relative is derived by means of a different verbal analogy. And that's how we'll open tomorrow, the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, even though tomorrow's a fast day, Tinus Esther. So we'll be weak, but we'll be teaching. And then we'll go to hear the Megillah reading, the evening Megillah reading when Purim begins tomorrow night. Well, that'll be after our class, at least here in LA. So regular class tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific. On Friday, we're back to the regular Friday time of the rest of the year, not winter, which is noon Pacific. So we'll have the Friday class at noon, and then we'll do our annual Megillah reading in English online at 1:30. I just got to have a little bit of a break between the class and the Megillah reading. So on Friday, we'll have the class at noon Pacific and the Megillah reading at 1:30 Pacific. Okay, it was Jack Benny who said, your money or your life. Hold on, I'm thinking. Thank you. Okay, some questions. Tom, what about to save someone else's life with regard to idol worship? Interesting. So someone says to you, bow down to this idol or I'm going to kill him. Psh. Great question. Now I'm not sure. I think you don't bow down to the idol. If you're not going to bow down to the idol even to save your own life, how much more you're not going to do it to save someone else's life? But I'm not sure that works. So I'm a little unsure. It just doesn't make sense to me that you would, if we're prohibited to bow down to an idol under all circumstances, then I think even to save someone else's life, because remember, you're not killing that person. This murderer, this murdering psychopath is killing that person, not you. So you're not allowed to bow down to the idol even to save your own life. I don't think you can do it even to save someone else's life, because really, right, it's the psychopath who's going to kill that person, not you. Bill, worth noting on this line about veryness, your veryness, meodecha, that the English word very derives from the Latin word veritas. I know what that word means. Truth, truthfulness, genuineness. So, love God with all your genuineness, all your authenticity. Thank you, Bill. I did not know that very derives from veritas. That's great. I appreciate that. Thank you. Bill also says, can we frame it this way? In both the case of idolatry and transgression for fear of religious persecution, what is ultimately being demanded of you is that you stop being Jewish. And that's why death is preferable. Yeah. And Sharon, one of the kinos that we read on Tisha B'Av speaks of a school for girls who all committed suicide rather than become sex slaves to the invading army. And that is presented as a Kiddush Hashem. They were not obligated to do that, but they were permitted to do that, and they chose to do that, and that's why it's considered a sanctification of God's name, a Kiddush Hashem. And then apparently there was an off-topic discussion about whether a non-Jew should wear a kippah in synagogue and difference in customs between Jews and Gentiles, which the hour is late and is beyond the scope of today. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll have a meaningful and not too difficult fast tomorrow, and then we'll meet at our regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, and then again Friday, we'll have regular class at noon Pacific, followed by the annual Megillah reading in English at 1:30. Have a good night.